All right. This is the third in the series of short videos that I'm putting out on the topic of reading. Although I can't do anything without starting with the obvious, I'd like to recognize and draw everyone's attention to the thousands of children who were murdered and are being found next to residential schools. And I'd also like to recognize the pain that they're undergoing right now as we speak in Ukraine for no other reason than greed on the part of a few individuals. And I'd like to do that with my healing song. When Mom died, I created this song, and it was something that my ancestors, my Ojibwe ancestors, would have done. We would have had a series of songs. This is my healing song. I won't play it all. This is just for the obvious reasons. All right, that being said and never forgotten, I'd like to speak to what it takes to become a reader. Maria Montessori called it years ago, and for the life of me, money keeps driving us in a different direction. Maria said it takes time. How much time? It depends on the child. It's not going to be in grade one. If you say it's going to, it's not going to be in grade three because you said it's going to. It depends on the child. Second thing she said, it takes as a hero. We have to get involved. You can't buy it at Toys R Us. We, parents, educators, teachers. The third thing she said, that's what I want to speak to today. She said books, no reading. Books, possible reading, not necessarily, but it starts with books. Now, there are all kinds of books. We know that. There are digital books. There are obviously there's books that you can hear, as I do. There's physical books. And they're all good. But let's be real clear with ourselves. In a lot of Canadian homes, they don't have access to a tablet where you can read digital books. In a lot of homes, they don't have access to the technologies that will allow us to listen to books as I do 24/7. Thus, that physical book tends to yet be a real good resource. Now, when it comes to that book, books we need, but they can't just be books. They have to be two things involved in those books. The first thing is the book has to include your readers. Period. It has to include your readers. It means you have to see yourself in a book or you're not going to want to read it. Period. Which is why, you could say to me, hey, I've got a movie for you. I might not want to read it. I might want to view it because it's not who I am. Likewise, thus when a school says to me, I've got extra books, is there a place you would recommend I could send them up north? I'd say, no. Sell your books and send the money so they can get their own books. All right. So it has to include the people who you're trying to develop into readers. If you're working with Filipino students, you better go online and get some books that include them, that are written by for Filipino people. If you're dealing with Indigenous people, we have a ton of authors and illustrators. We have a ton of men, a ton of women who write about who we are, why we are, illustrate about who we are. All right, so it's got to be inclusive. Period. And that, by the way, is why I write with books with a lot of poetry, a lot of rhythm and rhyme, so I can include more of my readers. But that's the other element, really, that I'm speaking of now, and it's accessibility. Books have to include our readers, and they have to be accessible to our readers. And what does that mean? Don't give somebody Lord of the Rings and say, hey, you'll like this if they don't have the ability, they don't have access to it. They can't read it for whatever reasons. And we're all at different reading levels. We know that. Thus, you have to make sure that the books that you're presenting to our potential readers are accessible to them, which is why I love graphic novels, which is why I'm loving so many new things that are happening, which is why when I write my books, I use a little rhythm and rhyme. I always use great illustrations just to attract them and include them, all right? So, and it becomes accessible to them. Books have to be accessible to our readers. Sometimes people say, oh, David writes children's books. Well, no, I don't. I've tried it two or three, but no, I don't. I write books with rhythm and rhyme, and sometimes I write them in a real basic format that some 83-year-old might pick up and say, hey, I love these pictures. Who are they by? Well, it's by Alan Sapp. Oh, I know that guy. I love that. Then you start to read it, and all of a sudden, a few pages in, you've read a book. And that's the important part about this. All right, so that's the last feature I wanted to speak to you of, and I wish you all the very best.